In this interview, you'll hear from Susie Terry, Coordinator of Homeless Education Services. She shares insights, tips, and strategies on how to manage multiple grant-funded projects. Susie is currently responsible for managing 4 different grants worth a whopping $6.4 million.
And what has your experience been with grants, either at SDCOE or before? Just in general, what has your overall experience been working with grants?
Prior to coming to SDCOE, I had some experience with grants from some nonprofit work that I have done. Mostly those are smaller, like foundation grants. But since I've been at SDCOE, all of the work that I have done has been grant funded, either state or federal grants. So they've all been big, much more complicated grant projects.
And once you've secured a grant, so you received your grant award notification and you move towards that post-award phase, what are some lessons learned along the way, good or bad, that you've picked up in your experience?
I think the biggest lesson for me initially was understanding the structure within SDCOE that you have to understand in order to receive a grant. I don't remember ever getting instruction, I think, before your department was there to help with the type, remembering that you have to get board approval to accept the money, that you have to do an issue paper in order to go to board, understanding what can and cannot be moved on before you have your grant award notification letter in hand. A lot of those just internal structure things I learned as I went because I was very unfamiliar with all of that.
What does it look like day to day? You are the coordinator of homeless education services, and so that's a big hat that you have to wear. So what does it look like day to day with all of the grants that you are overseeing and implementing?
Well, I currently oversee 4 different grants. So I have a federal youth homelessness demonstration project grant from HUD. I have the federal education for homeless children and youth grant from the Department of Education. I have a state grant to do homeless education technical assistance on a statewide basis. And then we have the additional grant of ARP, Homeless Children and Youth Funds. So 4 separate grants. That was a lot of issue papers and going to board and organizing budgets and figuring out, there are, with each grant comes a set of allowable uses, allowable costs, things you're not allowed to do with that particular pot of money. So just keeping track of what I can pay for with which budget. All of those grants also come with their own reporting requirements. So like in particular, the HUD grant has very different reporting requirements and a lot more of them than the other grants. Different financial reporting that has to be done on a quarterly basis, invoicing. So all 4 grants have like expenditure reports and program reporting requirements. So just sort of keeping track of all of those is a big part of my job. But then also you get a grant awarded to you to do work. So it also involves just overseeing, creating, implementing, and getting off the ground. Usually when you receive a grant, you're going to start a new scope of work, a new project of work. So getting that going, understanding if you need to hire staff, getting that part off the ground with HR. One of the things I had to learn was how to like create a position, if you have to go to personnel commission or not. Those were a lot of things I also didn't know at the beginning. And then if your grant involves, like a lot of my grants involve multiple contracts with outside providers for different types of services. And so understanding the contracting procedure, and how to get all of those processes up and running as well.
So someone listening who maybe hasn't worked with a grant might think, that's a lot of work, and she's got 4 of them. So what are tools, what are tips that you have to maintain the organization and keep everything moving smoothly? Because you do make it look so easy because you're so good at your job. But what are some of those tools that you've picked up along the way that you would recommend to others who also might be considering implementing several grants?
I think one of the tools that was helpful for me, that I actually got from you, Gabby, the first time you helped me with the grant, which was the timeline, the timetable. And so just keeping track of the different elements that are required, who you need to contact or collaborate with or get a signature from in order to get that done, and then like the time. So just essentially like those organizational tools. When I first started in this position, I worked under one grant. And so it was just me and my one grant for a really long time. And now that I've grown, the program has grown, learning additional organizational tools around work plans. I have separate work plans charted out for the different projects, for the different tasks, with like the timetables built in, because it gets hard to keep track of it all. I think that's the biggest thing. And then I have been fortunate to have really good business support from our business specialist, who, if I am not remembering something, she's on top of it. She knows when the expenditure reports are due. She knows if I get a new idea and I want to make a change. She knows whether or not we'll have to do a budget revision and submit it and get it approved first. And so having help like that has been really beneficial to me as well.
What has been your greatest joy in working and implementing grants?
I think just when you write a grant, for me, I get to look at the landscape. Like for me, it's homeless education. So I get to look at what's going on for homeless students or for districts and charter schools trying to support homeless students, and say, like, what would help? What idea do I have? And then I can write it all down. For me, when I write a grant, it usually comes very much from my heart. Like I'm writing like what I would love to see, and hoping that the recipient wants to give me money for it. So I think the joy is just getting every once in a while, you receive a grant and you get to do something that you really wanted to do that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. I'll give you an example with one of the most recent pots of money I received. We are implementing an emergency hotel voucher program for families, sort of regionally, so that if a family in Fallbrook who's in their car, needs an emergency hotel stay while they access some services, we can get them some nights at a hotel, hopefully in Fallbrook, to help them out. And so we got, that took a lot of contracts with community service providers and hotels, and we were able to announce at a meeting yesterday that we were up and ready to go, and we could accept referrals from McKinney-Vento liaisons, and we got like 5 calls yesterday right off the bat. And so that's such a good feeling to be able to say, like, we had this idea, we put it into action, and right away the community is like, this is something we needed, and we're getting to help people like on day one, which is such a great feeling.
That's amazing. One of the points that I always resonates with me, and this is because I'm familiar with your work, but also I am drawn to it in the example you gave, and that's the fact that I've seen you do this over and over and over again, and that's that you actually are so keen at building relationships that will then leverage putting these ideas into action. So you have grant funding, but it also takes these relationships in the community that are built on trust to be able to then execute. So could you talk a little bit about your work around that? Because that does not happen overnight. And I know you're just highly skilled in that. And I'd love to just hear from you. What does that look like in your building relationships to be able to provide the services to students and families?
I feel like part of that just has to do with my background. For 22 years before I came to SDCOE, I did social work with young people, and I never it teaches you never to barge right into a relationship and start like making the rules or establishing ground in relationships. I'm very much like an observer. When I meet new people, I'm usually more quiet, and I just pay attention and I watch. And then in the community, I think I do that and I keep showing up. So in the community, for me, it was establishing relationships in the homeless response system in San Diego County, which is a lot of different providers doing a lot of different work, not necessarily always thinking a lot about education. And I just kept showing up at all their stuff. I go to their meetings, I go to their events, I show up. And after a while, people start to trust you and talk to you and listen to what you have to say. And then collaborations have been born out of that, and partnerships that have been really beneficial to their communities and to our education communities.
What are some grant pro tips that you would have for someone that maybe is stepping into a similar role as you, who is new to SDCOE or new to grants in general? What are some closing thoughts around what would you recommend maybe to the Susie that joined us several years ago? What do you wish that someone had told you? What would you say to someone in a similar situation?
Like, every grant opportunity isn't the right one. I have worked on, when I first joined, I took over managing a grant that somebody else had gotten before I was with the organization. And it wasn't a good amount of money to do like a really impactful piece of work. And it was a federal grant from Administration of Children and Families, and it came with a ton of reporting and paperwork and follow-up. And that was one of my first experiences, and it didn't feel worth it to me. The joy part of it wasn't as big as it was an unwieldy amount of follow-up and work. So I kind of look at, what will this grant allow me to do? And is it going to be worth it to take on another grant to do this? So I really try to measure out the worth of applying for a grant, I think. And I have had grants. Some of my more recent grants have really been amazing opportunities that I'm enjoying immensely, but I have also had grants where I've asked myself, like, oh my gosh, why did you apply for this one? It's too much. So it's trying to balance out. Picking the right opportunity, I think, is the best thing, because when it is right, it doesn't feel very much like work at all.
And that's the key, right? Sometimes we are blinded by the potential funding that may come our way, and we don't do that due diligence that's needed initially to say, we need to weigh out everything. Do we have the bandwidth, all of that? So I appreciate you mentioning that, because I think sometimes we get so excited. We want to do good things for students and families, but we forget the post-award phase is where really all of the work comes to life. It's not really in the application pre-award phase. That's hard, but that's a very short window of time. The post-award, you're looking at multi-year projects that are going to require, for some, a heavy lift. So I appreciate your insight. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us in general about grants, or anything that you'd like to leave us with?
I think the other thing is just that it's always important to, like, one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about with grants, and having 4 right now, it's really, I think, taking up a lot of my mental space, but is sustainability planning. Like, if I get this money to start this work and I only have the money for 3 years, like, what will happen, not just to the work, but to the community, to the families, if at the end of 3 years, this whole project has to go away. And so I think when you work with grants, that's something that you sort of get used to, like, always weighing on the back of your mind while you work towards trying to figure it out or look for the next opportunity that can fund it. So it's a little bit of an interesting way to work that's very different than just, like, knowing that you have this money to do this work until you retire or whatever. But I also think that it's great if you want to be creative and you want to try new things. Every project I've ever tried, hasn't worked out great. Sometimes we find out, oh, this seemed like a really good idea, and then we learn, we sort of are able to inform the field about why it didn't work, and then we learn, the next step or whatever. So it's an interesting process, but it can be really fun, and it can be creative, and it can really pay off when it pays off.